Riot has been introducing multiple different champions into the jungle. You know, you have Rumble, Morgana, Darius, even to an extent, right? Although that was kind of failed. And so I think their entire approach is that, yeah, of course, they want to introduce more people into an undesirable role like jungle. But I think this is a band-aid fix more than anything. But let's not get into that entirely, because I want to talk about the entire idea of flex picks just as a whole within, you know, the entire League of Legends landscape, because I think Riot cannot prevent flex picks easily without limiting experimentation, right? And this is obviously because, well, if you try and attune a champion, you know, to only work this specific way or not have, you know, like tuning the damage to monsters, for instance, that's obviously going to affect their ability to be able to jungle, or maybe their AP or AD ratios, or their shields, or their AoE damage, etc. You're inherently just going to limit this champion's capability in order to go into the jungle, and that's very detrimental in terms of just the imagination of the community itself, right? I think that's one of the beauties of seeing a game progress throughout time, is that more and more people end up trying different things, and so you get like these weird quirky builds that you've never seen before. Hence, of course, AP Yi back in the day was not a very popular thing until people realized that his AP ratios were fucking bonkers, and then they put him in the mid lane and he became ridiculous. So I said in a previous video, I want to say in like 2019, in fact, that flex picks are the new criteria for greatness. I'll link that up in you know, if I remember. And I still believe that is actually the case, because if you think of just flex picks itself, it just has a massive advantage in draft, you know, from a professional perspective, right? It's just like you don't know if Rumble's going to go the jungle, or if he's going to go mid, or if Yasuo is going to go bot lane or mid lane, or Lucian's going to go mid lane or bot lane. Like, there's a whole bunch of different shit that you can throw in there. And I think this is actually kind of a leverage for a player's career, being able to play flex picks. At the time, I said before, this was when G2 was very dominant. And that was the whole thing, was that, well, yeah, of course, Perks can play a whole lot of different mid lane champions. And you don't know necessarily if that's going to go to Caps or if it's going to go to Perks, right? So it was this whole just confusing bucket that teams had to go into, and that would entirely throw off a draft. And what's important about draft is that because people realize that professional players play at such a high level to where mechanics aren't necessarily a big chasm, you know, as far as like the top pro players. Yeah, sure, the bottom versus the top pro players, it's a pretty large chasm, but you know, against anyone else, you know, the top pro players against the top pro players, no one can really get a mechanical advantage. So you have to get it through draft. You have to get it through numbers specifically. This is why patches are so important to learn for different players or different teams. But now with flex picks, though, that allows for you to necessarily dodge some of these crazy matchups that might happen and allow for your draft to be more flexible, and therefore maybe a player's career to be more flexible. Now, I think Riot have a very difficult problem on their hands, in that Riot can't perfectly balance the game as more champions are released. You know, I think we're at like 150, I want to say, probably above that. But as more and more variables get put into the entire equation, you get more and more complicated math problems, which I think it literally is, in fact, math problems. And so you have it to where you can't remember all the different variables that exist at all the times, which is why we end up finding some of this broken shit that happens within League of Legends history. You know, you think of Renekton with that fucking item called? You know, you guys know the item I'm talking about, where it gives you crazy fucking cooldown or CDR, and it's a bruiser item. Same thing that Riven used for, you know, her kit, and it just made them entirely fucking indestructible. Jax, same shit. And so Riot can't perfect all this shit because they're just multiple different champions released consistently. And so that happens to where you get lane Nocturne, you get Morgana mid, you get Swain support, you get Lucian mid, you get Ezreal mid, you know, back in the day. Y'all know what I'm talking about, Runeglaive. You know, you get Quinn top. So it becomes like this really difficult thing to track, and I don't think you can blame Riot for it necessarily, but I think it's kind of an inevitability that's going to happen within League of Legends, at least for the professional scene. Let's just stick to that, right? And I think obviously one way to balance the game very harshly is through class items. But if you do it through class items, you know, like say ADCs can only pick up Infinity Edge or whatever, then you prohibit the experimentation of the community, and therefore you disallow the surprise factor or the ingenuity factor of the community themselves, and to develop their own meta. So therefore you just limit the meta to what you want it to be, which is historically what Riot has done anyway. So like, I don't think this is outside of their wheelhouse as far as like the possibilities that they would actually produce, but I think it might be one way that they could actually go, although it would just be very harsh, and I'm not so sure as to how I feel about it. But as more and more champions get introduced, it becomes a more and more attractive idea. I mean, you've already seen this when they've introduced ranged versus melee items, right? Is that there are two different classes. And so they may be able to break this down even further to, you know, maybe your percent HP, and you can only buy this item if you have this certain amount of percent HP, or you can only buy this item if, you know, you're in the ADC role, or if you're in the jungle role, etc. Which they've already done, you know, with the whole jungle role thing, which is why we don't say blue Ezreal anymore. So the more flex picks are prevalent, the easier drafting gets for bad coaches. And this is a big aspect for the professional scene, is that, well, if a coach ends up botching a draft, or, you know, they really don't know where they want to go, or they don't have a game plan, they can just have their players play flex picks, and then at the very end of the draft, just assign the lanes as such to where it's not as bad as it would seem in the very beginning. And so you get like these get out of jail free cards, you know, it's like we're playing Monopoly now or something, you know what I mean? Like there should be some repercussions for creating a bad draft. And if Riot are allowing this to be like this escape avenue within just the professional League of Legends circuits, or leagues rather, then it waters down the entire aspect of draft entirely. And so to where it really doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things. And so I think draft is very important. I think this is an important aspect for coaches to be able to take responsibility of, and to actually, you know, guide their players and make sure that their players are up to date on the very specific meta, and to be able to take advantage of the champions that are the strongest. But if it's like, well, if everything is all flex picks, then it's all like subjective, you know, to a certain extent. So I think that would actually water down a lot of professional play. And I think the real issue then becomes if Riot then starts to try and dip into flexing AP or AD, right? To where, you know, on a singular champion, to where they can go like AD or they can go AP or whatnot. And that would just create an entire mess. And I hope it doesn't get that badly to where, you know, they adjust AP numbers and AD numbers to be equal within a specific champion. You kind of think of like a Kali back in the day. She was AP and AD, or even Jax to a certain extent, kind of. But really, what I think is that this problem is going to get so out of hand to where there are too many variables, there are too many champions, to where Riot is going to forget what combos actually exist, maybe with what items or what champions, and it's going to get out of hand to where inevitably Riot are going to have to put down the hammer and say there are too many flex picks within the game. We need to restructure how the game acts, or we need to restructure how items interact with champions. But at the end of the day, I think this is really something that's looming in the background, and no one wants to acknowledge it, even though we're seeing it more and more, with this jungle kind of change, where how they've tried to force some different champions within the jungle role so that they're viable, and yet it's a flex pick, and you can play Morgana support, or you can play it mid, or you can play it jungle. And so it's become like this weird a cesspool of champions that can play different roles. And I don't actually think that's healthy, at least for the professional scene. I don't think it will affect solo queue that much because, most people are going to go with whatever role that they were selected for or whatnot. But, and it's really not going to throw off the draft a whole lot because people are going to play how they're going to play anyways. But I think it will affect pro play, and I think it will take a certain nice dynamic that we've developed when it comes to teams and their drafting and maybe their strengths as a team and their play styles as a team.